I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The first thing is we want to approve the minutes from our April 4th meeting. As you remember, we didn't have a meeting in May. We had no issues, no applicants. Does anybody have any questions about the minutes? No. So I'll make a motion to approve them. Second. All in favor? Aye. You weren't here. Okay, so you will abstain. Okay, got that? Okay. I think the first thing we should do is reschedule our July meeting, because that'll impact when we schedule public hearings and so on. Right now, it's scheduled for July 4th. I don't think anybody wants it on July 4th. One date that everybody seems to be available for is Tuesday, July 11th, except Kelly.
I'm away from the 7th to the 13th.
Okay, you're away from the 7th to the 13th. Okay, so that date is no good for you. But we do have 5 people who can make it that night, so we would have a quorum.
Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, could I make a suggestion?
Sure.
And I understand this is the first time the board is hearing this. And in looking at the calendar today and looking at the applicant's submission on the special permit amendment to the town board, now what the applicant's looking to do is they have 2 approval timelines, if you will. Looking at the calendar, I thought perhaps if the board were to meet on Thursday, June 29th, which is the 5th Thursday, so I think the consultants are available. It's not usually that you have a 5th Thursday in a month. That would give the applicant a public hearing perhaps sooner rather than later, and it gives them more time to make comprehensive changes to the plans, perhaps for your August meeting. So shift your July meeting into the last week in June, and I think that would help out the applicant in terms of, it gives them more time. If you have a meeting on the 11th, they would need to turn around a submission on the 21st to make your August meeting. I don't know if they will be able to do that.
That would almost be a special meeting because we don't know whether another applicant for the July meeting, namely Skyview, whether they could be ready for that, even though it's not that much earlier than the 4th, which is the nominal.
In terms of work days.
John, I
have that you can't make.
can actually,
Oh,
that
you
changed, it did change, so I
You
can
can
make it
now,
that night,
okay.
yep.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm okay that night.
I can't make that.
you can't make that. Okay. You're okay for that one?
I'm okay for that.
You're okay, Ned, do you know about that one? Okay. You're okay. And I think Kelly's okay.
For the 29th.
Yeah. All right, why don't we, will that be the July meeting or will that be a special meeting? Would you guys be ready for the 29th?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to interrupt again. But
No, that's okay.
my thinking was, and I probably should have spoken to you today about this, but I think what would happen is, and I don't want to be presumptuous or suggest something if the board's not ready, but the applicant clearly is looking for a public hearing on the subdivision. And I think you should also consider having it on the site plan on the same night. Because if somebody was to come in, you don't want to turn them away and have them come back at a future date because it's not a subdivision or not a site plan comment. If they come in on the 29th for a public hearing, I would suggest that you don't take any more submissions. So let the applicant hear comments tonight from the consultants and the planning board. Schedule a public hearing for the 29th, and then they can start working on responses to those comments and have consultant meetings before the public hearing perhaps. Get any public comments on the 29th, and then they have until the 21st to make a submission for August 1st.
And sure, I'm sorry, the public hearing will be on the subdivision plat only.
No, and site plan
And
is
site
what we're
plan.
suggesting.
Okay.
Because when somebody shows up, they're gonna have
Not to
comments.
restrict what they can comment on.
Correct.
Okay, that's fine. I was gonna say to convene everyone on the 29th just for subdivision, I would then just say, okay, it doesn't, right, but if it's gonna be site plan jointly, then I do think it makes sense to start receiving any comments that we would get sooner than later.
What this schedule allows you to do is you will hear comments tonight.
Yep.
We can schedule consultant meetings as necessary. It gives you time, gives you 6 weeks to respond to consultant comments and almost 3 weeks to respond to any public
Because we would
comments.
we resubmit when?
I think the submission date was July 21st for the August 1st meeting.
July 21
All right, that'd be the Friday before the meeting.
for August 1. And look, I think something that we could also talk about is, and I'll want to ask my team if we can get it to you even before August 1, so that way we could get comment memos maybe a couple days in advance, and just, if it gives you and Valerie more time before the meeting. Right, if we have a 6-week lead time, we can make it 5 weeks, gives you 3 weeks to review, maybe it'd be better for everybody, but we can work that out.
I just want to point out that the attorney, who is not preparing any plans, is making a suggestion. If they want to.
Talk to her.
I'm looking at your
Yeah.
consultants and they're like, really? You're already promising
But
it?
that would be helpful.
Yeah. So, we'll talk. And I cannot be here the 29th, but the rest of the folks can, so I would say proceed without.
All right, so for the 29th, that would kind of be our special meeting.
Yes.
And our normal July meeting would be July 11th. Okay,
So, Greg,
so that gives you enough time to notice the public hearing for the 29th. Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, can I just update Greg real quick? It's
Sure.
sorry, we're late.
All right,
So we haven't got started yet substantively, we're talking process and summer scheduling. So the discussion is pending the outcome of tonight's presentations, public hearing on site plan and subdivision jointly on Thursday, June 29th, special meeting. And then we would receive comments from the public that night, obviously we receive comments tonight from the planning board, and then we would submit on July 21 for an August 1 planning board meeting. Come back later this year. That's good.
and if there is some loose ends, you could always come to the July 11th meeting.
Right.
If there's some outstanding item that we have to, right? We could do that.
Okay. Great.
And we could do Skyview on the 11th then, Deborah. Okay.
It might be good for the 29th, just,
Well, we can ask them.
If there
I
are,
thought we just said only one.
Yeah, that's,
I was gonna say that
Yeah,
might be
I
a good
think-
idea to only have one of the two big ones.
yeah, I think we should put Skyview on the 11th. All right, so why don't we schedule the public hearings now and get that out of the way, right? Kelly, we can do that?
If you'd like to.
Yeah.
Are you gonna start with Skyview and just open adjourn and then start with?
Yeah, why don't we do that? Because that public hearing is still open.
That public hearing is
Right.
still open.
Do I have to reopen that?
You can just make a motion to adjourn. Although, Deborah, have you spoken with them? Are they looking to come back to July or?
They are, yes.
They are?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Then, yes, I would say you can just make a, is anybody here? No? Okay, then motion to adjourn.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to adjourn the Skyview.
Is anybody here
hearing.
for Skyview?
No,
Okay.
I don't think so.
So it's
All right, can I have a second?
Second.
Okay, that's approved. Then I'll make another motion to reschedule it or reopen it. Is it,
just a motion to adjourn it to July 11th.
okay. So I'll make a motion to adjourn the Skyview Skylight public hearing until July 11th. Have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. And then I'll make a motion to schedule the public hearing for Related, Tuxedo Farms, for Thursday, June 29th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so they're out of the way. Okay, that's good.
Thank you for that, terrific.
Just for the benefit of the board, there was no way that we could approve anything for Related tonight, nor were you expecting any, I don't think.
Yes to both.
Right?
Yes.
For a number of reasons. The plans are still being developed. We have to have the public hearing. And I don't know if everybody is familiar with the need for you to go back to the town board for some special permit amendments. Maybe you,
Is that going to start with that?
yeah, why don't you start with that? 'Cause-
Mr. Chairman, should I use the microphone? How do you want me to,
I,
everyone's,
is there anybody on this?
We do have some.
Okay.
Yeah, if you
So
could
then you
grab
better.
that, would be
This is
great.
my picker.
Thank you.
And Ashley has a handout for purposes of this discussion. So,
Thank you.
I've been in conversations with Howard Potter, our town board attorney, about this submission, and I think we flagged this to the board the last time we were here. The two main substantive amendments to special permit and design guidelines. One, to adjust the sequencing between planning board, site plan, and ARB. The special permit is currently drafted and approved. ARB approval occurs prior to site plan approval. That's not how it's done in many jurisdictions, but that's the way the special permit was constructed. So what we're proposing is to reverse that, where the planning board can grant site plan approval conditioned upon coming back and finishing the ARB process. And the reason for that is because what we're asking for is site plan approval for the entire commons based upon the building footprints of all the buildings. So we're only seeking ARB approval for the initial 4 buildings, right, the vertical construction. That's what we're seeking ARB approval for. The way the special permit is currently written, we wouldn't be able to do that. So we're looking to, again, just adjust that sequencing so that planning board site plan can be granted prior to ARB approval. The second change is to adjust the road hierarchy plans to allow new road classifications that would facilitate additional parking in the commons, which we spent a lot of time talking to the board about last month. And that's just because of the way the roads are classified, the way they've been drafted, they don't allow parking on both sides of the street. So we're coming up with new road classifications again to facilitate the parking. Everything else is really clean up housekeeping type edits, right? While we were going through this exercise, our whole team went through the documents again. So some of the red line pages that you'll see there for the town board submission, some of it's just editorial, some of it's, a plant list was omitted inadvertently, so it's a lot of cleanup type comments. So the two main comments I need to focus on, the ARB planning board sequencing and the parking. So we made a submission to the town board this morning. We're hoping to be placed on its agenda Monday night. At least begin that part of the conversation, and we sent a copy of that submission to your board as well. And do this all in conjunction, in collaboration with Howard.
The town supervisor and the deputy town supervisor are here tonight, so will this get on the town board agenda for Monday?
I was busy interviewing police officers all day, so I didn't get this memo, and we'll read it after this meeting. But I would imagine we would want to make this happen.
I expect that we will have, that we're gonna get this onto the agenda. That being said, I haven't had a chance to read it either. So, if everything goes stunningly smoothly, there will be nothing that we need to clarify or discuss related regarding any of these changes. So we can then agree to it in general principle and schedule a public hearing on Monday. 2 weeks notice for public hearing puts public hearing at the meeting of the 26th. Assuming that we can work out any other minor things between now and then, and assuming we don't get any substantive comments, we might theoretically be able to vote and approve it at meeting. That sounds, given the history of this project, that sounds somewhat Pollyanna-ish, but I'm not saying that. Otherwise, we're into July 10, I think is the next meeting after that,
And the only other procedure would require a referral to county planning as well, so that's.
oh yeah, and they're gonna want 30 days.
They want 30 days.
So, yeah,
What's that? We could send it now and try to elicit a response sooner than 30 days, because they don't have to take the full time, but I just wanted to build that into the.
yeah, no, you're right, I have forgotten about that. While I'm talking, I don't know, I mean, the plant list, obviously, some of those things we can't do anything about. But the ARB question, thinking like an engineer, and the ARB approve the site plan parts of review and then look at buildings later.
So, what we're asking the planning board to do is to approve this site plan.
Right.
Based on the site layout. for the commons now, conditioned upon ARB approval of 4 building pads,
Right.
right?
But the reason that you want to adjust, if I understand correctly, the order of operations is because it says the ARB has to make approvals before planning board can. My question is, and this is a lawyer question because it makes perfect sense as an engineer, ARB says, look at this lovely site plan. The architectural parts are fine. There are plants where there's supposed to be plants. We have the list. We believe you're gonna put them in. We're fine with the ARB is fine with the site layout parts of architecture. Come back and talk to us when you have buildings to review. Which would probably happen faster than the change that you're asking for, if it's legal.
The way it's written right now, and I'm just very much simplifying it, the way it's written now, this board is gonna have to choose the design and the plans of all of the buildings before they know what buildings are actually gonna be built. So that's the way it's written now, that's why we're asking for it to be changed.
Okay, so then so the answer is, nice idea, take it won't work.
Right.
Got it, no problem.
Because we're ready for the site plan elements.
I understand. I didn't know we could split that, and apparently the answer
I
is no.
appreciate that.
Well, we also recognize that the architecture is very important and the design is very important, so there is included in there a referral for comment with the conceptual plans before the plan.
Okay.
Does anybody on the board have any questions about this?
You mean the sequencing
This,
of it?
well, anything about this issue with the special permit and the need to have it, amendments granted?
I don't think it would. We had a pretty extensive conversation or discussion at the last meeting about parking. And, could you elaborate a little on what you were alluding to when you mentioned parking earlier? Has some of those issues been rectified? Or
When they do their
concerns?
presentation, I think that'll come up, maybe,
That's fine, and we could show that, but just to answer the question with respect to what we're asking for the amendment, where parking, on-street parking can be located depends upon the way the street is classified on what's called a road hierarchy plan. So all we need to do is create these new classifications that would allow a road to be designated as such that permits parking on the street. So that
You wanted parking on both sides, that's the intent.
Right, and the way the road hierarchy plan is currently illustrated, we can't do that.
Is the road width adequate
Yes,
to support parking on both sides?
yes. So from a design standpoint, our consultant team has met with your consultants, and so from a layout and parking stall width and turnaround and all that kind of stuff, I think we've demonstrated technically we can make it work. Now we're just bringing the code to catch up to allow us to do it.
And that'll satisfy with the additional street parking, that'll satisfy the ratio of parking to number of units or the activity in that area.
Correct. I actually believe we could satisfy the ratio as is, even without the change. We just wanted to get additional parking because we expect it to be a lively, vibrant, active common, so we wanted to even provide more parking than what the code
Because I
requires.
think the last plot plans we looked at, it didn't seem, at least appearance-wise, that the parking was adequate for the use in that central area.
Right,
And the street parking now will rectify that concern?
correct.
Okay.
Ned, did you have a question?
I just had a comment. It really doesn't matter which direction we go in technically, because we're reviewing both of them at the same time anyway. So we're doing both building, layout, each stuff. It's all a combination of the two. So I don't see a reason as to why, if they want to do the change, I don't see,
Okay.
why
All
we
right.
can't do that, accommodate.
Okay, good.
So the one request in talking with Howard, because his first question to me was, so what does the planning board think? And the town board would want to hear from the planning board what your thoughts are on the proposed amendment.
So one question I have is, you were going to add plantings to a table in the special permit? Now, there's 10 pages of plantings already in the special permit. You really need more? I mean, just to maybe get one item off the table, for the amendments?
It was in the in the design guidelines where the planting lists were added, and they were planting lists that were previously approved by the town in 2015, and they were inadvertently left out, and it was because there were different sections that were, certain plants were designed for the front zone, and certain plants were designed for the rear zone, and some of the rear zone lists were inadvertently left out. So those have just been added back.
So that shouldn't be a big deal then.
Just so it's assembled correctly.
Okay.
That's all it's about.
All right, okay,
They're the exact same list that were previously.
okay. Does anybody else have any questions about this? Ready for Brad?
So the planning board could at some point,
There's questions for that about.
communicate back to the town board, whatever the planning board's general sentiment is about the
Yeah,
request.
we don't seem to have any issues with what you're proposing.
Just,
I have another
do the streets follow the same guidelines as the town with the no overnight parking, or will there be overnight parking allowed?
Private
Do we
roads,
know
there
on
would be
that?
overnight parking allowed on the private.
It would be, okay.
Even during the winter?
I believe so. I think we have some that will be used for snow storage. We do have a snow storage tank.
I saw that.
Yeah.
But storage is one thing, plowing is another. You have to get it off the streets first.
Or they just get plowed in.
I have one question, just to help me understand the consultant's comments, which, all right. When you listing number of units and number of bedrooms, what does the studio count as? 0? I mean, in bedrooms.
Are there any studios?
We don't have to.
Because the numbers seem to lean, or if there's no studios, it's like sort of 1.5 bedrooms average. It seems kind of a small average for this, for a community of family.
Well, I think it's a mix, and there's townhomes, there's like,
Yeah.
are small, and
But it seems
the
to
rentals
be,
are market.
seems to be a little weighted a little bit small in terms of number of bedrooms, considering how sort of family-oriented this area is. That's just a minor comment.
And we saw that was one of the comments, was to double check the unit count and bedroom count, so we're gonna do that.
Yeah.
All right, so why don't you make your presentation? Let me ask you one thing.
Sure.
When questions come up, you want to hold all the questions to the end or as they come up to answer them at that
I
point?
always welcome a hot bench, ask away, and let's have a good interactive discussion.
Okay. Okay, so with that,
All right, so we're gonna start actually with the heart, so we have the whole consultant team here, right? I'm not gonna introduce everyone individually, but we have folks from both AQRF, Langen Engineering, and Hart Howerton. As folks come up to the microphone, they'll introduce themselves. What's that? Yes, and the architects as well in the back. So, we're gonna start with the architecture, then we'll sort of segue to landscaping and civil site engineering design. And that's really the order of the presentation. And then when we get to the civil site engineering, it's with the snow plowing, for example, the snow storage will come into play. So we'll start with Paul.
Good evening. Thank you, everyone. Pleasure to be with you again. My name is Paul Milan. I'm a partner with Hart Howerton. We've been leading the master plan and the architecture for the Commons. I'm joined tonight by my colleagues, Paul Blazik, Patrick Dunlevy, and our colleague, Paul with LA, who will be the architect of record for the buildings and the Commons. I thought we would start by just reminding everybody where we are. I know you all know very well where we are, but I think it's helpful for everyone. We're, of course, making this submission about Quail Road from 17 up to the Commons and then back down to 17. And as we've described it in past meetings, this is what we really see as the heart and soul of Tuxedo Farms. It's the place where we have the greatest mix of uses. We think that it's the place where there's the greatest opportunity for neighbors to get to know one another, walkable streets, having engaging ground floor uses, having appropriate materials and landscape features that really create a center for this community and place for people to get to know one another. And we've shown you in the next slide an illustrative drawing which highlights the areas that we're focused on right now that are in bold in color. This is an illustrative, this version, like any master plan, evolves and grows and changes, and so as we get into the technical documents, there are some minor changes reflected on this plan from what has been submitted to you, in fact, what we're asking for your consideration. But really, the intent of this is to talk about the sequencing of how one approaches the commons from 17, whether you turn in from the northern entrance in Tuxedo or the southern entrance in Sloatsburg. One is traversing through a landscape, and it really is a natural experience. It's a place where the roads, you can have a curvilinear nature to them. You're seeing unfolding landscapes, you're seeing some rock faces, you're seeing forests, you're seeing into sort of dark areas of wetlands, you're climbing this site, and you're eventually finding yourself on a bench. The site is a very series of stepped benches, and the commons is sort of the first perched bench. And as one comes around the corner, the nature of Quail Road begins to change. It actually begins to narrow in its perception. You start to see buildings, and they're commingled with nature. And as one comes around the corner, let's say from the north, turning in, you begin to see buildings that are approached that are addressing Quail Road. And you're starting to see more of an urban condition and less of a rural or landscape condition. So then, as we come through the commons, we have buildings then on both sides of us. Maybe at this point we can go into the blow-up. And you begin to have sidewalks with trees planted in tree planters, foundation landscaping. We have ground floor units where we begin to see the signs of life, people living in this community. We have buildings with some ground floor commercial uses, retail, perhaps daycare. As we move closer to the intersection of Quail and Bridle Trail Road, that's our town center. That's really the target of the bullseye. And we have our square there with some buildings on that square, which could be a market, could be a cafe, a pavilion that might have a farmer's market on the weekends, or it could have different events throughout the year. It could be a 4th of July celebration. And a couple of buildings that would serve as civic buildings, a library/meeting hall, fitness building that would incorporate various fitness programming. And then one would continue down, we have a recreation area with some tennis courts, soccer field, some other paddle courts. And then continuing down Quail Road, you have that experience in reverse. You begin to, that sense of the urban core begins to release, and you find your way winding by some neighborhoods and then back down to 17 through nature. And then, of course, when one turns off of Quail, we have the various neighborhoods that we've talked about in past presentations with regard to the overall master plan. That sequence is very carefully been thought about in terms of how we approach the landscaping, how we approach the details of sidewalks and street trees, whether they're regular during, at the commons itself, or they start to take on more irregular form and planting plan as we're in the more natural areas. All of that's been considered. Keep going. So we showed you these sections. These have been updated from the last time by one building, Building 15. As was mentioned, the first phase buildings are anticipated to be buildings 5, 6, 14, and 15. And maybe, Patrick, if you go back one, we can just show those in the plan. Sorry, I jump around. So 5 is a building that's on the north side of the square. It's actually, just hover over 5 for a second. It looks like it's 2 buildings because we're cutting through the ground floor, but there's actually a passage on the ground floor that takes us from the sidewalk on Bridle Trail Road up through a series of steps because there's a 10-foot grade change, and then out through the backside of that building and in a little parking court. And so that building actually has a really beautiful architectural feature which would allow that to happen. And so as you come down the other way, you look across and over to the square. Building 6 is adjacent to Building 5. And then directly across from 5 and 6 are 14 and 15. And those, so all of those buildings have ground floor commercial. They have three floors of residential above it, so they're 4-story buildings. And the parking is either behind or on street. And to the earlier question about parking, we really believe the on-street parking does a number of things. One, on-street parking is actually helpful to walkability because it provides a barrier between moving traffic and moving people. And so you have a stationary car that actually helps the pedestrian feel safer. It provides convenient parking spaces for people who are visiting, who might be here because they're patronizing one of the commercial uses here, and they're coming from another neighborhood, or they're coming from the village, and they want to go to a store, and they park on street because it's the most convenient for them. And in doing so, it preserves the cannibalization of residential parking, perhaps in the more private areas behind in the courtyard. So we think that the on-street parking really does quite a lot for us. And then it gives us options on snow days where if we have to limit parking in certain areas, we have extra parking to manage that. And then if we go into the sections again, just the section on the top is taken through the commons. It's actually taken through the center of the commons. So there's a little sort of quasi-street in the middle, calling it Wharton Place. And then that cuts through from Lower Mountain Lake Road, Wharton Place, through that donut block of buildings 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then through 5 in that little passage that you see cut in section. And then the square, Bridle Trail Road, and then the square depiction of building 3 in the background. And you can see that it is a sort of contemporary version of Tudor architecture. So in thinking about the vertical articulation of the massing, the forward-facing gables, the sort of long gable, the long ridge, which is parallel to the street, which has intersecting gables. Thinking about ways that the windows begin to stack and make vertical patterns along the facade. And then as we go into some of the bluffs, which we'll show you in just a second, how we treat the upper floors and how we begin to express more of a dormer expression on the upper floors. The section, I'll just go back one. The section below that, section through, is through Quail Road, looking to the west. So it's looking back toward the square, back toward most of the buildings in the commons. You see the sort of ridges of the mountains in the background. And you're seeing, again, on the right, we're up at Lower Mountain Lake Road. You're starting to see the grade change coming through Quail and how that begins to fall. Brayburn is that cross street, comes through. We have building 6, building 5, then Bridle Trail, and the square. So these two sections are both looking in the same direction. They're just, one is in the center of the commons and one is through Quail Road. And then on the next page, on the top section, we're looking through Quail Road, looking just in the opposite direction, so looking toward the east, toward 17, toward 87, towards the Arapahoe River, in that direction. So on the left side is our high side, so we have building 18 at the top, and then as Quail begins to lower in grade, you see 17, 16, 15, 14. There's a little plaza between 14 and building 1, which is conceived right now as our fitness building. And that little plaza will have a series of terraces, and we'll be able to get down to the parking that we indicate below, which is about 10 or between 10 and 12 feet below the level of Quail Road. And then looking on the section below, looks through Bridle Trail. This is the road that intersects Quail and goes off to the west into those portions, those other neighborhoods, Upland Park and some of the other neighborhoods in that direction. And that's looking at Building 5, which is the north face of our square. And you can see how Building 5 is one building, but it's separated by that arch on the ground floor, which takes you up through those stairs. And then you're seeing the end of Building 14. and then a conceptual form for the library meeting hall, which is actually building 4 on our plan. And then we blew up the buildings that we are planning to have as our first phase, and these are sort of schematic level elevations. And so you can see a portion of building 5 in the upper left corner, which is, again, residential over retail. Building 6 in the upper right, which is residential over retail. You're all residential over retail. And then 14 and 15 below. And these this facade development responds to the building, the unit plans, how they've evolved in the schematic planning of the building. It reflects where living room windows are, where bedroom windows are, and we've looked at ways to stack those, whether they might have a window or may have a step-out balcony, or whether we might combine windows on the facade using a spandrel panel, which is a little panel sort of between the sill of one window and the header of another building, and that helps to emphasize the vertical proportion, which is more in keeping with the Tudor style. I mentioned earlier how we're thinking about the upper floors, so we're treating the 4th floor of these buildings more like a dormer floor. And so the idea is that they would be rendered in a siding type that could be painted a tone that would be very consistent with, let's say, the tone of the roof. And so that whole area would appear more like a dormer floor. So a traditional, let's say a Tudor that was developed in the early 20th century often had a true attic. But those attics, are very different in terms of the floor area space that they provide. So this is a way of reviving that look, but not losing floor area for the units on the upper floor, because they'll have a great view. Those units will want to have the same floor space that the units below have, but they'll be higher, they'll have longer views, they'll be very desirable units. But I think it's a way for us to evoke the traditional architecture of the Tudor style and do it in a way that's sensitive to the building plan and the floor plans that we want to maintain. And we're looking at a variety of materials. We're showing stucco type materials, we're showing siding type materials. We're looking at different types of roofs, whether it's a simulated slate or an architectural shingle with a shadow that gives you the impression of slate. So all of the materials we're still researching and pricing, but this is the look we are intending for these buildings.
When do you envision that development to be completed?
Well, once we get past the current set of approvals, then we can continue developing the buildings through design development, which is where we're really going to then start to think about what are the structural systems, we have an idea right now about the structural systems, but we'll determine that for real. We have what are the actual materials, we'll start looking at manufacturers and their warranties and so forth, and then we'll apply colors. We'll pick window systems. All of that happens usually in design development once you have an established schematic design. Paul, do you want to opine on just sort of schedules of design development? Are usually what?
I mean, we don't necessarily need the schedule.
6 to 8 months of development, between design development and construction documents.
Because we would need the specifics before the ARD
Yes.
can approve it, just so you.
Yeah, understood.
Now, one other question about this. On that 4th floor, are there going to be slanted ceilings internally, like in a cape style?
What we would maintain.
As a result of the dormer?
What we would maintain is a minimum height at the window of 7 feet. So if there's any pitch to the ceiling, it would happen above 7 feet. That's the standard that we're imposing.
So there'll be some.
There may not be any, but if there are, in some cases, as we begin to look at all the conditions and we say we're going to have to do a pitch ceiling in this, we'll design it so that it's not a head height issue.
Okay.
Do you have a target construction date?
End of the year.
I'm sorry?
End of the year?
End of this year.
For start.
For sure.
Starting.
Yeah, that's the target
And phase 1,
for the phase 1. Right.
2 years?
Those are for
How long?
Completion.
construction duration. It's 14, 16 months probably.
Question on the construction. Is the erection of these structures gonna be based upon sale? Or are you just gonna go and build them all and then market them?
No, these we built, that's the first group of 4, we one package, and we go, the first group of 4, would be one package, we go forward with that. So this first group is envisioned to be a rental product, so you build it and then you rent it.
No, it's on spec.
It does back in.
I got an awful lot of people asking me when they can move in, so.
Okay, great. Some more way.
Okay. I think that's, the rest are more technical drawings. So we can get
Pass
us
that mic to Christina.
Christina Gillespie with Langen Engineering, the site civil engineer. So as we met during the working sessions, we figured out the parking. We added parking on building 1, so there's parking below the ground level. We added parking where it's stacked in some of the buildings, 19 through 21. So the stacked unit, the stacked parking spaces would be to 1 unit, so it's not like you have to go move your unit. So we added all the parking, we have adequate parking. I know it came up that would residential parking be required on Bell Road? Based on adding all this parking in along Lower Mountain Lake Road, Portland Place, we wouldn't need to rely on residential parking on Bell Road. So that, I know that was a concern. So commercial, you have your commercial guests coming in, but the residential people would not have to rely on parking there. So we have this is the version that we submitted, but we've since amended, but we changed the classifications of Portland Place and Lower Mountain Lake Road to allow the parking on both sides of the street. Quail Road remained the same. We adjusted the classification to eliminate some of the on-street parking along these buildings because it didn't make sense. And then it's the same classification as it heads back out. So we made some minor adjustments, but Quail Road remained the same, parking on both sides of the street. The other thing, just to clarify, that this is a single entire lot, so these Rayburn and Wharton Place are not, they don't have right-of-ways associated with them. They're private, they're just connector roads. So with our this whole thing for buildings 5 through 12, it's all one lot, essentially. So our setbacks are reflective of that. And it's the same down with 14 through 18 and then 19 through 20. It's all one lot. So we made sure our setbacks are reflected. We tried to color code them to make things easier. We took into consideration, the mixed use buildings where you may have the commercial on the lower floors versus the residential. So we tried to make that as clear as possible.
Could you clarify which of the roads are town responsibility?
Yes. So on the road hierarchy plan, we have it. We labeled them. The major roads are the town-owned roads, and then like the collector and local roads are the private.
I believe there's 3 town roads, is that right?
Correct.
Quail, Bridle,
Yeah. Quill, Bridle, and then, yes. Yeah, Lower Mountain Lake. So we made sure that was clear on the plans, who owns what.
As far as the tech memo from last fall, I think we even calculated the linear feet of those proposing.
We did run fire truck turning to make sure a fire truck can get through. We used the actual Town of Tuxedo's fire truck. We got the specs, it was actually available online. Their same model, everything, so we made sure, the one we ran is bigger actually, so we were a little more conservative. But they can circulate through. We have a plan that shows aerial apparatus access for the buildings that require it. We color coded it, so that way it's clear how the trucks can maneuver through the site, and there's no issues with them getting in and even circulating around internally with these roads, at the internal circulation if they needed to.
Can I ask a question about that? So, does that take into account if there's mutual aid So like the Sloatsburg, they have a big aerial, or if one of the other local towns gets called in. Like, was that considered? Some of those trucks are bigger, I think, than what Tuxedo has, right?
Couldn't answer that accurately, but
So,
certainly a point of concern.
I mean, based on the meeting, it was our understanding that the fire station down at this entrance would be responding first. So that's the truck that we mainly use. But I mean, the other fire trucks should be able to traverse through since we were conservative on the active vehicle that we use.
On the fire truck issue, did you check to see if our aerial ladder will reach up to the height of your buildings?
It's my understanding that that was looked at, based upon a meeting with the fire department early on. To make sure that the height all complies with the ladders.
We specifically asked that question of the fire marshal at the staff level meeting a couple weeks ago, and he said
Yeah.
it's the building height.
Yep.
regulated by the fire.
Okay, thank you.
We developed a comprehensive snow storage plan since that was concerned on where snow storage was. So we showed areas of snow storage on the plan. Again, Quail Road would not have to be used for the residential parking. During the snowstorm, it wouldn't need to be. So if there is restrictions, overnight restrictions on, because it would be a town road, again, the residents don't need to use it. And we factored in with the snow removal as well. That's
I read someplace where there's no dedicated visitor parking,
correct.
right? Is there dedicated resident parking, like residents only, anywhere?
We're currently not showing that right now. Well, yeah, under the buildings,
But not on the street.
but not on the street.
So they need some kind of access card to get in under the building, or?
Wait, you're gonna do under building parking?
Just took them, they just drive. And some of them,
Yeah, and some of the, on building one, there's
depends on the grade.
parking underneath the
Also, like
building.
what I mentioned a couple meetings ago about putting a parking lot underneath the buildings? and
Yeah, that's what-
Elevate the building.
That's what we did on building one. We have parking underneath building one now.
So that'll be residents only in there?
That one's unclear, because that use is not residential, but some of the buildings, have, because of the way the site is created, we have 20 feet between Upper Mountain Lake Road and Bridle. There's about 20 feet of grade change, and so we use, the parking areas, and let's say in the center of the commons, we're at 10 feet. And so we use the buildings to have the ground floor of some of the buildings are actually below Upper Mountain Lake Road, and so therefore you can park completely under them. And so that would be protected parking. And some of the buildings have rear single-loaded garages, so they're sort of tuck under, it's called a tuck under typology. So you have a unit facing out on the street, but then a parking space behind that's underneath a portion of the building. So, there will be some areas that we wouldn't just allow anyone to park. You have to be a resident to park in those areas.
And I know you've dedicated quite a number of EV parking spaces. Do each one of those have a charger?
I think so, yeah.
We're counting them. I think for planning purposes, we're showing each one having a charging spot. Just so that we have spatially enough area dedicated in case each one does have it.
Well, in 3 years, there's gonna be a few more.
Yeah, for sure. We want to be prepared. And that technology is changing constantly, so we haven't actually spec'd the equipment yet.
That's a lot of chargers right off the bat, though. I think you have 100 some odd, 110 EV spaces now. So each one has a charger, okay.
I got a question, since we're talking about electricity. Have you folks met with Orange and Rockland Electric as to
Yes.
what type of substation requirements there would be for this and where you would plant it?
From a non-technical standpoint, they said there's plenty of power there, yeah. So,
They said there's adequate now?
yeah.
Really?
Is it above ground?
I mean, is there anything else that you can put on site?
I'm surprised to hear that, because that's a significant load.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole project.
Right, and we met with them in probably 8 months, last summer.
Have you given an estimate of the load?
Yes, yes. And they had no concerns. Our next step with them is when we have our first site plan approved, we send it to them, that's the next step with them. But they said it looks fine.
But they'll have to put in a substation for that, I would presume.
I don't know about that, but,
You ought to consider it, because it would take up some space,
I mean,
some real estate.
do you want to know this answer? I don't know. Yeah, they said there's plenty of power, actually redundant power, plenty for this area.
I mean, you would think it'd be an on-site substation.
I can't imagine how you could build this without a substation.
Okay, we'll look at that.
I've worked in the power
So
industry.
you'll,
for a lot
you'll
of
find
years.
out during construction, you'll be using more power during construction than you will when it's finished.
Well, the engineers can answer that question.
I would second check with them.
Yeah, we will. Thanks for raising it, yeah.
I have a question. I might have missed it, and if I did, I'm sorry. The trash collection, are there dumpsters? Is there some kind of collection in the buildings? How will that be working?
We're showing areas for dumpster locations,
Okay.
so they're already factored in. They're
And-
spread out, there's multiple in each area.
And there will be trash rooms on the ground floors of.
Of each of the buildings?
Yeah,
Okay.
so they'll largely be in the trash room, and then when they can be transferred to the dumpster, it's all can be managed through the management of the property.
Perfect. And then it's not what you asked, but it's similar. Are the electrical wires below or above? They're below. That's nice.
Yeah, they have to be now.
Yeah.
Any.
Oh, really? Oh, I
Yeah,
didn't know
my
that. Okay.
understanding,
Any new development?
talking with Henry, is that
Too
there's
vulnerable.
conduit already installed for
Okay,
the electrical lines based on the prior coordination, so.
that's nice.
Regarding parking on the street and fire hydrants, are the fire hydrants on the street? And then did you take into account that people can't park in front of them?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's fire hydrants along Quail Road. They're in a concrete bump out area of an island, so there won't be a
So
parking.
there won't be parking.
There are no parking.
Even better.
Anything else on the site civil drawings? We'll segue to landscaping.
Can I don't know if this, you tell me where it fits, but I wanted to get some feedback on the decision regarding the pool and not having one. How did that decision come about, I guess I'm asking, because it seemed like trying to improve the town, make it more community-like. I mean, nothing brings together community like a pool. And I know originally when we talked about this development, that the pool was gonna be one of the centerpieces of it for the community, so is that a you question, or is that a?
Paul, I can defer to Paul as well, but we thought about it for a while, and we never thought it was a centerpiece of the community. There must have been a conversation years past, but, and Paul, do you wanna?
Well, I mean, we're not showing an outdoor pool. There may be an indoor pool, it's to be determined yet, but, right now we're, the space that's just to the south of building one, I think in a previous iteration, we showed.
Only because, I mean, you're trying to draw young families, right, middle-class young families, like where do they spend their summers at the pool?
Right now, that area is graded and has a retaining wall, so if there could be a pool there in the future.
Or even maybe a man-made lake or something, like a swim club, or, no?
You
probably
probably do it as a
not.
pool, but I think it doesn't preclude a pool, but
Okay.
right now we're not showing a pool as part of what we're currently planning, but that doesn't mean it can't happen in the future.
Okay. Thanks.
Or possibly in other neighborhoods, possibly.
Could be.
Potentially, just take like.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have to be in the commons area,
Yeah.
but, yeah.
I can speak a little bit to the landscape. I'm Paul Blasey with Hart Howerton. I worked on the landscape portion of the project. And the landscape is obviously a really important part of it. When we started working on the project, we really talked about what will attract people to live here. I think a big part of it is the natural beauty of the place. It's a beautiful site, beautiful forested landscape, mountainous rock outcrops, some great things on the site. So the landscape design, we really wanted to emphasize that, to have a landscape that fits right in with that natural environment. So it's very much a naturalistic planting, naturalistic landscape approach. As you come up Quail Road, you're driving through a meadow clearing, forest on both sides, big shrub planting as a base to the forest to kind of soften that edge, introducing new trees throughout the approach road, so you feel like you're kind of driving through the forest to some degree. The entrance itself will announce with flowering trees, crabapple trees, and a grove of orchard trees at the arrival point. There's moments, these kind of key viewpoints where you get these views to the wetlands, these sort of openings in the forest. So we took advantage of those. So you're opening those views up so you can see out of the car as you drive up. Entering into the town center, you're really entering into a kind of Main Street, broad canopy street trees. A lot of thought about the paving materials, cobblestone banding along the sort of street planters, street grates, crosswalks, special paving, so a kind of real sort of Main Street town feel. Looking at the smart code, the planting palette is very much, it's all taken from the plant list on the smart code. It's primarily a native plant palette. Trying to avoid kind of monoculture, so for example, with street trees, it's not just one kind of tree, but each street has its own identity, different type of tree on each street. For some special planting conditions, there are places where the snow stockpiling will happen. Those are all, that planting will be salt tolerant so that it can handle the sort of salts in the snow and that's melting out. And also some conditions for screening the parking, that's an important consideration, doing it with hedges in key places where you're driving by so you're not looking into those parking areas. The palette, as I mentioned before, is primarily native, so we have the kind of categories of plant palettes. We have the kind of very naturalistic meadow planting, forest, shrub planting. We get closer into town, we have kind of foundation planting that's a little more neat for the foundations of the buildings. And then those special conditions of places, for example, like where we have the water detention areas, and those are suitable for that kind of occasional inundation. So I think that's a summary of the landscape approach.
The plantings along the roads that will eventually be dedicated to the town, who maintains those? Who cuts the nearby grass? Who collects the leaves in the fall? Have you gotten there yet?
Yeah, that one I can't, I'm not sure how that's approached. There would be, if you're driving through an area of meadow, the area immediately adjacent to the street would need to be mowed or just maintained. I think beyond that, we haven't really been part of the discussions about who maintains that.
I'm not sure the answer is yet.
Yeah.
What?
No, it's a good question. We haven't talked about that. Ordinarily, when the road gets dedicated, the municipality is responsible for the maintenance, but there will be an HOA, so we should have that conversation as to who's maintaining those.
So to be determined.
Be determined.
Okay.
And just to clarify, team, correct me if I'm wrong, but this landscaping that Paul presented tonight, this is the level of detail that we're hoping will be sufficient for the site plan review, and then we'll come back in with more detailed landscaping for each of the buildings that are sought for the ARB approval. So that's, the level of detail is a topic that we'll continue to discuss with the consultants. I just wanted to sort of identify that for the board, that just like the building materials, the detailed landscaping would be sort of building by building. This is the general concept for the overall site.
Well, the locations are specified, but the exact cultivars will be determined at a later date. But they have provided a range, so you know it's going to be one of these items.
There's 10 pages of possibilities.
No, but they narrowed it down on the plan.
Yeah,
they
this
did?
would be, this is our sort of our choices,
Okay.
taken from those 10 pages.
All right.
Yeah.
That sounds better.
It's been cool.
So I think that completes our presentation.
Okay. Thank you. So why don't we get our consultants? comments?
Sure, yeah, I'll start. So, I distributed written comments, the applicant acknowledged receiving them today, and I know the board got them over the weekend. I'm just gonna walk you through my approach a little bit on this. So I have repeated some comments that the applicant has acknowledged that they will take care of. I've just kept them in the memo so that they don't get misplaced or anything like that. My general approach to reviewing plans like this, and they can be overwhelming, is to focus on the high-level items initially and then get more and more detailed. With the idea of getting more and more detailed relative to site plan approval, I've suggested to the applicant they continue to take advantage of the board's offer to meet with the consultants separately. I would like a couple of the meetings, if possible, to focus on the utilities. I think there's a number of comments I have on utilities. I did not put them in here because it really, I don't think is germane to the board's discussion. Things like hydrant placing, valve clustering, and stuff like that, we could get to in a consultant's meeting. Specifically though, since you brought it up, the hydrants are shown on the plan. I don't know if the hydrants actually satisfy the code requirements. I don't know if they satisfy the fire code requirement for spacing on either side of the hydrant. I think you need 26 feet across, and I forget what it is. I think it might be 20 feet longitudinally. I don't know if they meet that specifically, but again, that was something I was hoping to get into with them in a technical meeting. Generally, the plans I think are progressing. I think you're getting more and more detail. I think the applicant's being responsive to your comments. Specifically, there were a lot of comments the last round about compliance with the zoning requirements, the setbacks, parking, snow storage. They've given you plans that are specific to that right now, so you can review it. When we met for the first consultants meeting on May 10th, there were questions about emergency access. The applicant provided you the turning plan. That turning plan modeled a 107-foot tall truck. I understand the town's truck has a ladder of 103 feet. I don't know of Slopesburg's. I don't know if it's larger, but perhaps the applicant could just make a call over there to make a determination. They may have already provided enough area on the turning plan for that. In terms of the subdivision, the plan still indicates it's a realty subdivision going to the Orange County Department of Health. I had initially suggested that that may not be required. I don't know if you've had a chance to reach out to them to see if it is required. I don't think it is.
Yeah, I think we can concur with that. I think that may have just been just a lingering note on the plan if that's the case. We'll double check that.
All right, so in terms of the subdivision, what the applicant's looking to do is they're looking to take their existing parcels, it's either 5 or 6, and to make, by my count, 14 development lots and 6 road lots. Some of the development lots will include parcels that aren't really intended for development. They're just identified as development lots. For example, you can't see it there, but you may recall that there was a maintenance shed required off of Quail Road. That's going to be on its own separate lot. Yep, there it is. So that would be its own separate lot, and that would be included in those 14 development lots we talked about. You had discussed a little bit the housing numbers, the bedrooms. I counted 327, but initially you were at 336. So there's been a reduction in the number of units. I don't know if that's intentional, and I want to try to, it is. Okay, because that all ties into parking. Okay, that all ties into parking and everything else. I just wanted to make sure those numbers were accurate. At the last meeting, the applicant heard from your board about concern about the residential density. They're now before you and they're phasing their architectural review, and obviously they're going to phase their construction. You've heard about the package of the first 4 buildings. Those buildings are mixed use and they will be heavy commercial relative to the residential. So I think I had like 30,000 square feet of commercial and 84 housing units to support that, at least initially. So it's not really anything for the board. I mean, you're allowed to develop it in that fashion. I just was pointing it out because the board had questions last time. The applicant's already addressed the road hierarchy and how they're going to go to the town board for an amendment of the special permit. In terms of the fire code, forgive me for jumping back around, we did have at the consultants meeting the code enforcement official. I had asked the applicant to prepare something addressing aerial apparatus. They've given us something at this point, and that needs to go to the code enforcement official for an approval. So I think in addition to referring plans to the highway department relative to snow storage and pavement width, you're also going to want to make sure that you get a recommendation or approval from the code enforcement official. Quail Road, I think I heard in the presentation that you were continuing Quail Road for the entire distance. That's now in the first phase? Okay. So to do that on the southerly part, they're going to require approval from the Village of Sloatsburg. Any action that this board takes should have a condition in there that they're going to need to obtain that approval before issuance of building permits or construction begins on the site. Parking, I did do an independent count of the parking. My numbers were slightly different than your numbers. I don't know who's right. I counted it twice, I think I'm right. But the overarching thing is, of course, the applicant should have the right numbers on there, but even if my numbers, which are a slight reduction, are the accurate numbers, they still are in compliance with the requirements of the smart code. I did have a question, I think the chairman hit on this about the EV parking. There's EV parking, and it's schematically shown with infrastructure to support electrical charging. There also are future EV charging stalls. I don't know what triggers the development or conversion of those from standard stalls into EV stalls. Is that something that you could address tonight? No? Okay. Okay. The only reason I wanted to discuss it tonight a little bit was it ties back in, right? They get a doubling effect for an EV stall. The calculations assume all the future stalls, future EV stalls, they applied that doubling, that multiplier. It could affect your parking. Okay. There's also a little bit of a distribution item in terms of where they're placing EV stalls and other stalls. So for example, building 14, which is in the first group that they're looking to develop, all of the stalls behind building 14 are either EV or ADA accessible. So there's no standard stalls back there. Building 14 does have a residential component. I understand they'd have to, and there's no parking up for residents. So I don't know if the applicant intended for that, to have that concentration of EV and non-standard stalls adjacent to building 14. Other than that, the board had asked for a massing model. I think that was Justin at the last meeting. I don't know if the applicant is anywhere closer to developing that. I presume that would come about more when the architectural plans are developed. But again, I just didn't want that to be forgotten. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman, unless the board has any questions.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Questions? I have one question. It's not exactly related to what Sean has said. You've already drilled the 2 wells, I understand, right? And one of them will be applicable and operational for this first phase. Do you have an emergency generator for that well?
Good question. I don't know the answer.
So no power, no
Yeah,
water?
I think you'd have to.
I would think
Mr.
so.
Chairman, they have a storage tank. So no power, they would have gravity feed. So they have 24 hours of storage in their storage tank, and they're also going to be required to have 2 wells. The requirement is that you, at the minimum.
Right.
Well, they have 2
We'll
now,
we'll
right?
have to open the second one. The second one's not open. So the first one's done running, the second one we have to finish. Right.
That 24 hours, full build out? Is enough storage?
I don't
for-
know, I don't know, Mr. Chairman, I haven't looked at it that
That's a
specific.
good point. We should look at it. We should check.
I'm pretty sure that they do
That's
have a
what I-
generator. And the reason that's important is the health department requirement, and this will require health department approval for the water system. Health department requirement is, you need to provide the maximum daily requirement with the largest well out of service. So if you have 1 well, you can't meet that requirement, so you need at least 2 wells that would, in order to meet that requirement.
Have you cited a pumping station?
For
water.
Yes.
Yeah, sewer, yes. And there's one existing that's operating. And sewer is actually, there's no flow obviously from it. But yes, there's a pump station now. And there's 1 well is operational. The other well, there's 5 wells that have been identified and cleared, the locations. The second well we'll have to make operational.
Is the fire loop off of the elevated storage tank? No.
Don't know that answer. Don't know that answer.
Yes.
It is?
Okay, thanks, John.
Is there natural gas service to this? Or
Yes.
there will be
There will
natural
be. We're
gas?
toying the idea of not having it, but I think we're probably not there yet. We'd love to not have it.
You loved it, so it's not,
But at the moment, I think at the moment, we are planning for it.
you are planning for it now, okay.
If that changes, if we can get all behind electric, which we're doing in the city, then we'll do it.
Would you consider opening the road to Eagle Valley as a construction road after you build the first buildings, just so there's less disturbance to the residents when you build your first building?
I don't think we do that. It's just say, distance.
I'm sorry,
I don't think we can do that. I mean, we'd,
you don't think?
no, it's not. I mean, look at it. I think it's maybe too much of a heavy lift.
I was thinking just as, not like a,
Yeah.
finished road.
Yeah,
but-
I mean, it's a good point. I mean, we should look at it.
The current trigger for that is once the active adult starts.
Right, no, I was thinking
Yeah.
just.
Construction, it's a long road over there, so
Yeah,
it's
it's a
heading
long-
through.
That's an alternate access for heavy equipment and stuff, so. Obviously, you don't wanna, disturb the finished roads that you put in for the first buildings.
Yeah, we can look at it. Let's look at it.
How's it going?
You're on.
Mr. Chairman and the board, thanks for having me. We had similar comments to Sean. I'm Scott, by the way, I'm filling in for Valerie tonight, but I've been reviewing this application since the beginning. I was at the consultant meeting in May, so I'm up to pace. So just some primary comments we had was just sort of cleaning up some of the site plan, some of the aspects of the legend. So there's some hatch patterns that we couldn't identify. For example, you guys said you used a new hatch for the screening for the parking. We couldn't identify that. So that might be something that might be implementable in the landscaping plan to make the review easier. Other than that, we asked that the setbacks for every building are on each building. It would be convenient if there was just the single setback that applied to that particular building, so we can check that easily. Besides that, we did have a couple concerns, back to the EV parking. I believe it's east of building one.
I think we want to
Yeah,
just
can
quickly
we-
address the setback question.
Yeah, the setback
Yeah.
question, because one of the things that I wanted to make sure you understood is that this entire area is one lot, so all the setbacks for all, there are no setbacks like on these buildings that are in the center of that lot.
Understood, gotcha.
Okay, we want to make sure we're all on the same page there.
Yeah.
Which is common in a PID, right, in the plan integrated development, so that's a common design feature.
Thank you. But yeah, we looking at the EV parking to the east of building one, and we saw that is in the wetland buffer zone and is actually relatively close to the actual wetland itself. So we just wanted to ask that the applicant ensure that there's not gonna be any sort of issues, with water and EV chargers being located right there. Other than that, we would ask the applicant to provide the actual height of the building, other than just the floors. And a lot of our comments had to do with the former hierarchy plan, so we understand that that's changing. We reviewed that against, what's on the books for now, so I'm sure you guys understand, but we just ask that you provide the sidewalk widths or the road widths, so that we can ensure compliance with Table 8 of the Smart Code. Other than that, like I said, most of our comments were just sort of in reference to cleaning up the site plan, but we agree with Sean that application looks like it's moving in the right direction.
Mr. Chairman, can I just add two items? I apologize, I missed them. In terms of what Scott had just said about the sidewalk, and I apologize if you mentioned this, but in the submission with this special permit amendment, it looks like you're looking for the town board to grant the planning board authority to make modifications to the sidewalk. It's a footnote to one of the road hierarchies. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. There's some sections along Quail Road where we think a sidewalk may not be necessary out to Route 17. There's something to connect to. So, at some point in time, if there ever is a sidewalk to connect to, it might make sense. So we want the ability to.
I really just want the board to be aware of that, because as they review it and they look back in the special code, they may see some inconsistencies. But you are looking for the ability to grant this board that authority to reduce the width or even eliminate a sidewalk altogether.
That's great, because as we got into details, we realized that some of this is not making sense in sidewalk.
Yeah.
So we just want that, right, does it make sense?
The other item I had, Mr. Chairman, was ARB. The special permit, and I know the applicant isn't really ready to proceed with ARB, right? That's the whole purpose of their amendment. But the special permit allows you to hire any architects as you may feel necessary. So as you perhaps meet subsequently, you may want to have some board discussions whether you want to consider that.
Well, we have one on the board already. And Justin is an architect also.
I understand,
No,
I'm just
but
pointing out that you
point
have
well
that
taken.
ability.
If we need it, we'll consider that.
That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Anybody have any questions at this point? You had one drawing, and I didn't dig it out, that shows phase 1A, 1B, 1C with circles. Could you call that one up? I apologize for not having the drawing.
We're gonna test Patrick's filing system right now.
It's A00101.
Glad you can read that.
That's why you gave it to me.
Yeah, exactly.
And you did.
It wasn't in the same.
The architect.
I don't have the excuse to do my everything.
You don't have that?
So what ended up happening with that is because we proposed changing, having the site plan approval with the advanced head of architecture, we eliminated that initial phasing plan that we discussed at the May meeting. The phasing was conceptual of how we anticipate the phasing of the buildings come in for architecture review. So we are proposing these first four buildings, and then I think that's how the rest of the architecture, the rest of the buildings would be phased
So from
in.
a site plan perspective, that drawing does not apply.
But it does, yeah, it doesn't apply to the site plan, it's more informational of how we intend to sequence the ARB approval.
So it's still valid for ARB? Okay, all right, good. That clarifies it. So anything else by anybody? Any questions? You guys have any questions?
Should we just clarify, wrap up next steps?
Sure.
So, the public hearing on June 29th, based upon the site plan and subdivision set that was already submitted, that's the subject of tonight, although I suppose we should probably include the updated hierarchy plan as part of that presentation on
Yes.
29th. And then we will submit July 21, thereabout, in anticipation of the August 1st planning board meeting, should we need anything, July 11th as a, if needed, and we'll take it from there.
Okay. Okay, very good, thank you. One thing before we adjourn, we do have to get our training in for the year. And Bill has already completed his, so thank you. Susan only needs 1 hour to go. I'll slap myself on the wrist, I don't have any yet either, as I think some of us don't have. So let's, it's June already, so we don't want to be scrambling in November, December, so let's try to get that in.
Do we need to authorize Kelly to write a letter to the town board with our feedback on the,
I would appreciate a motion if you could. I wrote it in red to come back to you.
on the proposed
Special
change to the special permit?
Okay, that we agree.
Yeah, right now it says that you don't have any issues with what's being proposed, and I'll
Okay.
put it in a letter for you to review.
So I'll make a motion to recommend to the town board the proposed changes for the special permit.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Okay.
Thanks, Chairman.
Thanks, everybody.
No, I think they did.
Yeah,